You've got Dina agus Falchigadi, a cut of Brehov is Misha Queeving of Flanagan. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy, and I'm Kevin Flanagan. And in tonight's episode, we're going to be hearing from Mike Doyle. And Mike is the man behind Clans and Dynasties brand. And we're going to cover a lot of ground in this discussion, from the Gaelic O'Brien clan to the Anglo-Norman Butler clan, and even we even touch on the Viking clans, the sons of Ivar the Boneless, and Viking names that are left over from those times. We talk about the period of time in the 1300s when the Irish became, or the Anglo-Normans became, Nís Galí Ná Gael Féin, which meant the more Irish than the Irish themselves. And we also visit the Battle of Clontarf, and we learn that at least 2/3 of the island, not that they were fighting in it, but that Brian Boru had access to their resources and so on. Now, before we get into that, please subscribe to this channel. Help me get to 30,000 subscribers. I'm so close now. I can almost taste it. If you're already subscribed, please visit the website where you're going to find all of the information about my online courses, which include Early Irish Culture and Society, Irish Mythology, and Brehon Laws of Early Ireland. If that doesn't tickle your fancy, well, we also have a blog over there with many articles. You're bound to find something that you like. We also have an online store over there, so you can help me out by, buying a t-shirt or a poster or a cup or something like that. Or if you want to support me on a monthly basis, consider becoming a member of this channel. There should be a join button under there, and you can simply click that, and you can become a member for as little as €1.99 per month, which I think works out about €25 per year. Also, to check out the social media pages, so we have a presence on Facebook, we're on X, we're on Instagram, and of course we're on YouTube. And I know I've already said it, but I'm going to say it again. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to the channel. If you are interested in conversations about Irish culture, if you want to learn about Brehon law, then this is the place for you. And please subscribe. And I'm not going to ask you to switch the bell on, because that's just mental for notifications. But if you want to switch the bell on for notifications when new videos are uploaded, then please do that as well. Now, with all of that being said, let's jump into the conversation with Mike Doyle. welcome to the channel, Mike. And I don't know if you're going to post this on your own channel as well. But for those who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do and why you're here?
Yeah, so I am the content creator slash historian for Clans and Dynasties or Dynasties, depending on your pronunciation. And yeah, to give you a bit of background of me, I actually don't have a academic background in history. I originally went into sports sciences. I joined the military. I did my further education all around sports and sports science, but I always had this massive interest in surnames. My surname is Doyle, which doesn't have a grand history recorded in the annals or any other sort of source material, contemporary source material. So it always irked me that these who were these Doyles and why can I not find them? Like you don't have that problem with the Flanagans, Kevin. Um, but I did, and I there's a so over the last sort of 20 years, I researched surnames and tried to figure out where the Doyles fit in the story of Ireland. And eventually, I decided to start a YouTube channel during COVID to share what I'd found. The problem I found was that, if anyone remembers during COVID, that the
How could we
politics got
forget?
very divisive. Yeah, the politics got very divisive, and then I started realizing people were using history as a way to back up their arguments. And this is not a specific finger point at any sort of ideology or anyone holds. It's just that because I saw it all of the spectrum, the spectrum all on every side. And I thought it was just wrong, or the information I was getting shared was wrong. So it really pushed me with a good friend of mine, Philip, um, from Irish Medieval History, who I know
Yeah,
you've had on your channel
I've met
before.
him as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was
So
you who
we,
introduced
we
us. He actually reached out to me and
yes,
he name dropped you. So I'm really glad for that introduction. Thanks for doing that.
no, it's great. He's a great guy, and we've worked together for a very long time. But he was always the academic, and I used him to back up my credentials. Anything I ever researched, and I was sort of like, look, this is my research. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? And Yeah, so he was always someone. So I always say my all my information is peer reviewed. But I've now got a wider. I've been doing this a number of years. I now got a wider circle, and it's really opened up so many doors for me, which I'm very grateful for. But yeah, and like I say, my channel is just about primarily about surnames, their place in history, and I think it's very important in human nature. It's like a natural instinct to find your piece in the puzzle of the human story. And I just want to sort of show people, kind of where your puzzle piece fits, but not to say that what the picture is.
Mhm.
So people who define themselves by this, I am of Norse descent from a Viking, or I am a Gael, or I don't want to encourage or discourage that, but like I say, I'm not here to say this is the canvas. I'm just saying this is your piece of puzzle, and this is where it fits, and you interpret that how you will. But make sure you use as much factual, source material to sort of back it up.
Yeah.
And that's me in a nutshell, really.
Excellent. And so I'm looking at your channel here and I can see that you have quite a few videos on different clan names. And the thumbnails are what stuck out for me. Originally, I thought you had brilliant thumbnails with the little characters that I don't know how you make those. Um, so did you find anything surprising when you were researching your own family name? Did you find out anything interesting?
Um, yeah, but we're not of Viking descent. And I'm going to say that literally as we're not a Viking, because when I first started researching names, I had this idea, and I'm going to say it as it is, it's a very simple idea of the Vikings coming across, having children, surnames existing. And then I realized as I researched that the term Viking and how their place in the world and the world structure at the time, societies at the time, wasn't so simple that I could just say Viking and Irishman or Vikings and English. It was multi-layered. There was, and how they viewed themselves and how we view them today. And then I realized, okay, so that sort of opened up that sort of side of history for me. And then I realized, obviously, that, well, where did the Doyles fit in this new concept that I have in my brain?
Mm.
And then I was like, well, actually, just because the surname means dark foreigner or dark stranger, which is the
Yeah.
Doyle translation,
Dovgal,
yes, it doesn't necessarily mean
a Viking.
a Viking, although it's used in a loose term in the annals, to describe a faction within the Danish faction within the North Dublin world, the Gaul Gael world, and yeah. So I found out, and anyway, I found out eventually that it seems to be a name that Irish people are being given as they move into Viking towns. It's almost like a nickname for Irishmen who are moving into Viking settlements or Norse settlements, um, and getting jobs, into marrying, just general migratory families moving in, and then it just seems to be a name that they then take on themselves after being given it by the surrounding Irish populace. So, and it also has a Norman. There's also a Norman branch. There's also other branches. It's a very simplistic answer, but yeah. So it seems to be families Irish, but then that opened up the question of like, so Irish families are moving into North settlements. These
Yes.
aren't gated communities. These aren't there's something happening here, and obviously that again opened up my eyes to just the general interactions between these Norse, because I'm sure you see it all the time, Kevin, online, these very simplistic ideas of like the Vikings came across and they did this and they did that. And it's like, well, they also did this and they did that. And we were doing this and that as well, and it's like with this very black and white narrative that we try and paint towards history is incorrect, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I actually interviewed Bertie Brosnan there about a couple of months ago, and we went on a deep dive of the Battle of Clontarf.
mm,
He mentioned you in that interview, and he said that you had done the research into which families, which clans fought at the Battle of Clontarf.
mm.
And he said that you said in that video that every clan, or at least two-thirds of the clans in the country, were represented. Not that they were fighting there as a clan, but they were represented at the Battle of Clontarf. Could you speak a little bit more about that? What did you find in your research?
Yeah, I mean, again, I do also state in the video that it's more of his area of recruitment that he would have at his disposal. Brian Boru, we're obviously talking about here, and the two-thirds he would have due to who partakes, which kingdoms do partake in the battle itself, either against him or don't partake, like the email possibly didn't, most likely didn't. That he would have that at his disposal. Now, obviously, like you say, and you sort of touched on it there, not every family is going to represent either at the battle or, there are things to take into consideration like supply lines. There was a battle happening, or there was troops in southern Leinster at the time as well that weren't part of the battle, so they would be doing other things. Um, gathering resources, whatever. So to say they were specifically on the front line, I try to avoid that statement completely. But just to say that, look, we don't actually know who was there, but this is the area that he had under his control at his disposal to recruit from.
Yeah.
And these are the kings and their recruitment areas, the local kings that we know were there. And as you can see, it takes up two-thirds of Ireland. So we don't. so he had, so basically 2/3 of Ireland were in some capacity involved in the Battle of Clontarf on Brian's side. And but like I said, we will never know for certain at what level.
Yeah.
And I had to also put a we claim in that we don't, just because a king went with his forces, so a more local king, like a provincial rather than a provincial tutorial king went, and we know we've got the answer. It doesn't mean that he had all the support within his, you know, local family. We know how rivalries were
Yeah.
formed and
Yeah.
existed in Ireland. So it shows that it's possible, and it's an argument that, because obviously people are very, depending on where you sit on the fence of it. Did Brian control the entire Ireland?
Mm.
Who was involved? It sort of just shows that actually he did have a lot more control
Yeah.
than
Well,
um,
he's the only High King of Ireland who is described as Emperor of the Scoti. And
yeah.
when I spoke to Bertie about that, I was saying, like, would that extend to Scotland? And he agreed that it could possibly extend to Scotland. And, just to kind of bring it into a more modern era, since the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland have been divided, and people are all talking about like 32 county unity and things like that. But the thing is, and your Clans and Dynasties channel really highlights this idea of they were kin groups and they were faction fighting. So I say to people that, like, Ireland has never really been united, not in the way that it is today, except for under Brian Boru, because even when I have a book about the High Kings of Ireland over there on the shelf, and in it there's never a High King that isn't in opposition.
Hmm.
Um, so this idea that the High King rules from Tara, no, the person who sat in Tara was considered the High King, but it doesn't mean that all of the provincial kings were paying homage to the High King. So I just found it really interesting when I spoke to Bertie about that, and he kind of said, "Yeah, you're right." And that's when he mentioned your video about the clans fighting at the Battle of Clontarf.
Yeah, I mean, there has always been a deep-seated line of division in Ireland, actually, from I think it's called the Mag Line, that runs across, which is sort of semi-recorded. It's sort of highlighted upon on this north-south divide, but it's not where Northern Ireland is, the modern day state of modern Northern Ireland is today. It's pretty much through the middle.
Yeah,
And now you can sort of say maybe that's a sort of 8th century sort of
invention.
rather than which a lot of we can see a lot of inventions happening right from the 6th century. Basically, once the church starts writing things down, we sort of see their twist on it. And but we do know, so you have the Owenoctor, who are probably the most powerful family in the south before the rise of the Dalcash, and the Neil in North. Both these king groups are trying to legitimize their claim to Ireland, and they're both doing every tactic in the book, political, warfare, anything they can to sort of undermine
Intermarrying as well.
intermarriage, to undermine the other's claim. And and this goes on right, it goes on forever, really. And but as for so whenever obviously Brian Boru rises up, he's an outsider. The Dalcash are they're a Dacia family, although they then start doing their own editing of genealogies and put themselves in the Owenoctor line, um, because they need to legitimize their claim to Munster because they now hold it. Um, they they get involved in this, and Brian is basically just a warlord. He's not from a great prestigious family, although they were starting to become under his father. uh, but they are still a noble family. And his ability to, I think, him being an outsider almost works to his benefit as much as to his detriment. Because yes, he's not part of these two famous lines, but that gives him new perspectives, that gives him new allies, it gives him new everything. I suppose that these two families who have basically boxed themselves into these political corners of we will never allow an Owen-Octor king as an Neil, or we will never allow High King as an Neil, as an Owen-Octor. He was able to just wipe the chessboard. Unfortunately, by wiping the chessboard, he also opened the way up for a lot more, what I would say, disunity in Ireland, because the term High King, although it's not a, there's never been, apart from Brian Boru, a king that owned all of Ireland. That's a very hard point to get across in
Yeah.
the sense of they did and they didn't. But it's the same way as I touched on this on other things I've talked about before. Is no country exists, or these attempts to create a link between ancient countries or ancient kingdoms and modern countries um, is wrong in a lot of ways. Because England is united in 927, and that people will use that argument to say, well, England's existed as a thing, but the people, how people at the time viewed statehood, nationhood, nationality was not the same as how we view them today.
Exactly.
And England wasn't formed in 1997. The kingdom would be broken up again with Danelaw, and there would be northern rebellions and southern rebellions. And this idea of um, nationalism, or as we interpret it, modern nationalism today, is a really, I suppose, has its earliest roots in the Tudor period. But it, well, no, that's a slight. Its earliest seedlings probably appeared during the Hundred Years' War in England. Sort of starts to become this little plant in Tudor England, and then really starts to come to flower and bloom in the Industrial Age. And that just shows you how new the idea of nationhood and nationality and nationalism is in the grand scope of history, and that's applicable. And there's no country that sort of falls outside of this. Nobody breaks the pattern. Human nature is human nature, and every country sort of goes through this around the same time. And trying to connect these dots of like, well, the Irish were referring to these guys as foreigners, so they had a self-identity of being an Irishman. I'll give you a really good example as someone who's been in the Middle East, and in a lot of Middle Eastern countries, they have you will find people that will say, "My God, my tribe, my family." Okay, and that, but depending on who you speak to, depends on what order that is in. And that sort of idea can be applied to the way nationhood was understood by people in Ireland. So yes, they could be referred to as an Irishman. Most of the times this is being referred to by outside sources, looking in as a collective group going, oh, that's an Irishman because he speaks Irish. But they may never, that individual may never have referred to themselves as an Irishman.
Yeah.
I suppose Northern Ireland's a great example, and that you can be you're Northern Irish, Irish or British, and we're collectively known as British, by many external sources. Yet I would refer to myself as Irish in a cultural sense.
Same here.
But I understand that I have a British passport.
But geographically, these
Yeah.
islands have historically been referred to as the British Isles, and there was a time when that wasn't seen as offensive. But because when I'm traveling, I've traveled quite a lot of the world, and the people ask me where I'm from, And when I say Ireland, they go, "Oh, UK," and I'm like, "No, it's not UK, not at all. Let me give you a history lesson here." Um,
They're 100 years out of date there.
I know, yeah. But I understand why they're saying it. And this is the thing, like we in Ireland have this kind of idea that everybody cares about what we're doing, but nobody really cares about Ireland, and because it's tiny and it's tiny and there's only 5 million people in the country. It's like on the grand scheme of things, Ireland is quite insignificant on the world stage, but we do have a history of diplomacy. We do have a history of great writers. We do have a history of great music, you know. So we've been influential in that sense that we've a soft influence on the world. Um, but politically, I'm not so sure. And I'm just thinking about a video I saw the other day. I think it was by Thomas Sheridan, and he's talking about um, the the, uh, the relationship between Ireland and America.
Mm.
And oh, that's what, yeah, talking about RTE and how everybody gets their factual information off RTE and no further. And so when the Taoiseach and the Tannistry was over in the States in March of this year, um, Simon Harris was walking in the parade, and Micheál Martin was in the White House giving the shamrocks, but it wasn't on St. Patrick's Day. On St. Patrick's Day, who was in the White House? Conor McGregor, right? So. But he was saying that they didn't come back and think, oh, that's a bit odd. Like maybe we should review how we're behaving, and maybe there's something wrong with us. They just don't think that way, you know. So yeah, uh, I wonder if you know anything about those family names. Like, do you look into the family names of people in politics and make a connection to their ancient family roots?
Funny.
I'm thinking about Micheál Martin here for one, and Simon Harris, which I don't think either of those names are Irish, are they?
No, sorry, Michael Martin, and who was the second name?
Simon Harris.
Simon Harris. Okay, so Harris does have a name, a possible connection to. In fact, both names could have Irish connections. Martin and Harris can be Anglicized mothers. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but there are Irish names that have been Anglicized, but most likely you're going to be of English or an incoming migratory group into Ireland with the names Harris and Martin. But there was a paper done, oh, it must be about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even a little bit later, where someone had done genetic tests on individuals and they'd seen their surnames and they were like, right, um, if you're of native Irish descent, and if you put it in two categories, native Irish descent or other, who yeah, and these are old migrated groups, not people who've maybe moved in over the last sort of 100 years or something. And they found out that if you were, I believe, if you were of a native Irish surname, they found a pattern that you were more likely to vote Fianna Fáil, and if you were of Norman descent or a later group, you were more likely to vote Fine Gael. And I, which is a crazy thing. And obviously, this is one paper. I haven't checked to see any peer reviewed information on it since. But it was an interesting. When it's just more towards your point that you asked me about that, because it was an interesting a topic that I have sort of looked at in Northern Ireland. Because if you drive down I worked in Belfast, and I used to have to cut through East Belfast to avoid the traffic. And you would see a lot of murals and memorials to World War II in these very predominantly loyalist Protestant areas of Belfast. And on the walls, I would always clock what we would consider as native Irish surnames on these walls as people fighting, and being remembered for fighting in World War II. And anyone that doesn't know, there was no conscription in Northern Ireland during any of the world wars. So these individuals went of their own accord. I also then find out, obviously, the two factions at the time of World War One. You when we were looking to gain independence, and you had the UVF, and which would then branch off into the Ulster regiments, and then you had Redmond's forces, which were sort of Catholic Irish forces. And the UVF, loyalist, sort of Protestant, proud British, only sent across one regiment,
Yeah.
whereas the Catholics regiment, or not, and I'm using these terms loosely because I get there are sort of things, but the Catholics sent three regiments in World War One,
Yeah.
and it really sort of opened up the how people. It doesn't matter of your background, because we can see it even today with modern politics, Micheál Martin, Harris, and you've got look at Sinn Féin with with Adams and with their surnames,
Yeah. Hmm.
and how the lines blur, and really I think religious division and cultural background division are man-made to try and force people into a box. I mean, even during the early troubles, there was an IRA group in East Belfast, um, which doesn't get talked about, but they were more socialist um, than wanting unification of Ireland. So they were more in this IRA group, or formed this IRA group, from more towards their socialist ideals than their. But then, because very early on in the Troubles, there wasn't really as clear cut religious divide. But then a man made decision was made by groups to try and encompass as many people as they could within
Yeah.
their side
Hmm.
of the fence, that they broadened out to say, and you will see it, the IRA attacking Protestant people, you see it during
Yeah.
Cromwell's invasion, you see it
Hmm.
during the Protestant, in this attempt. This is manufactured information. It's true, these things are happening, but it's manufactured in a way that it encompasses more, and it turns people, Protestants or Catholics or whatever, who are sitting on an unknown side because maybe they agree with this, but they
Yeah.
don't agree with that. And it's a way of sweeping them into their side, their way of thinking.
Yeah. It's
Um,
pure divide and conquer tactics.
but yeah.
And if there's an effort, let's just say, if there's an effort to have reconciliation, those same parties, Sinn Féin and the UDF or UDA, whatever, um, DUP, should I say, they will step in and they will interfere with that because it's in their interest that people are divided.
Mhm.
And that's probably a tactic of the British Empire because we've seen it in India, or what was originally called Hindustan, which included India and Pakistan at the time. It was like a massive country. And when they were living peacefully for, well, I don't know if they were absolutely living peacefully, but once the British left, they left a divide in the land. And so that's why you have had since then this animosity between India and Pakistan that has sometimes boiled over into war. Most recently, we've seen that, um, and their nuclear powers. But I want to go back a little bit into medieval history because I totally hear what you're saying about this idea of using religion and culture as a kind of rallying call.
Mhm.
Um, because as far as I know, that the Irish chieftains, some of them were, don't get me wrong, some of them were very religious, but as far as I know, they once the Protestant church separated from the Catholic church, so that's how far I'm going back here, it became expedient then to emphasize your Catholicism because that was the way you got support from Catholic Spain or Catholic France. So you could the chieftains would make appeals based on like we are your Catholic brothers, but it took a long time for for that idea to kind of take place. So what I'm trying to say is that as soon as it became politically expedient to um, use Catholicism as a label, that's when it started to be used as a label. And here's the thing, right? You have Christians on both sides, Catholics and Protestants, but they're behaving in a very unchristian way, right? Like they're killing each other. Um, so yeah, I just found that very interesting that it didn't start, it hasn't always been that way. And you have to understand as well, what was the reason for the English Anglo-Norman lords and the Irish lords to not get along with each other before King Henry VIII had his chop and change approach to his marriage and he left the church and set up the Anglican Protestant church? What was the clash? And I would suggest that it was the clash of legal systems. It was the clash between the Crown law and the Brehon law. And that was probably highlighted in the 1300s when the current king, the then king, issued the Statutes of Kilkenny. And what was interesting about that piece of legislation was it was aimed at the Anglo-Norman families that were already living in Ireland. And it said things like any Anglo-Norman lords who take Irish nurses for their children, or who wear their hair long like the Irish do, or who ride their horses without saddles like the Irish do. But probably the biggest part of that was any Anglo-Norman lords who goes to the Brehon for adjudication of disputes will be considered a traitor to this crown. So you have to ask yourself what was going on in the country at the time that encouraged the Anglo-Norman lords, and I should say like they didn't spend a lot of time in the UK. It wasn't UK at the time, but they didn't spend a lot of time in England. They were originally from France, as far as I know, Normandy, and they came to Ireland. They stopped over in Wales, and then they came to Ireland. So I don't think they had that much of a loyalty to their Anglo identity. And so they came over here and they seen what we were doing and what they were doing, should I say, the early Irish. And they were like, I want a piece of that. That looks really good. So I wonder if you've heard about that in your research, and do you take that into account when you're doing your own research?
Yeah, this area of Norman conquest in Ireland would probably be my main focal point in history, because as most surnames sort of start to form, well, the dates are between the 10th and the 13th century. But it's very loose on one side and it's very loose on the other. The main area seems to be around the 11th and 12th, which obviously leads right into the Norman era.
Mm.
And obviously the Statutes of Kilkenny in 1367 or 68 actually touches on surnames. It states that any Irishman dwelling within English held lands, which is the Pale, must change their name to a job title like Smith
Yeah.
or carpenter, a color brown, black, white,
Mm.
and a couple of others that I could name
I
off of one
think
go
I
into
think
it.
that that is a little bit later than I think the Statutes of Kilkenny were in like 1320 or something like that. But I do know what you're talking about with regards to their surnames, and I think that if I remember correctly, because I've made a few videos about this. It was a long time ago now, so I could be wrong. But I think that surname piece of legislation came a little bit later, and I don't know if it was made in Kilkenny, but I think the statutes of Kilkenny are a bit different than that. So yeah.
For anyway, we know the legislation exists. That these are things are happening anyway. But there's Norman invasion. So what happens is what you have. The problem is again, it comes back to kind of what we were touching about interpretation of self-identity, and so in that the Norman families they've been in Wales about 80 years or so, because it's initially the Anglo-Norman families, Fitzstevens, Carews, Barrys, Fitzgeralds, um, And these are marcher families. So these are families living on the periphery of the English kingdom already. They're already on the outside of, they're not really policed at the same way that a noble would be within certain other areas of England, central held lands. They're intermarrying Welsh families. The Fitzgeralds, I think it's Fitzgeralds, are descendants from Nest, a Welsh princess. So these families are already highly integrating into, and they do it everywhere. They do it in Sicily. The Normans as a group do it in Sicily. They do it everywhere they go. It's more about assimilation than just out and out conquering. And the Normans come across to Ireland, and you see with the Burke family specifically is a really good example. Fitzgeralds are another good example. The Desmond branch from South Munster, not the Kildare family. You see this divide happening where the Burkes in Mayo and the Fitzgeralds uh, become Gaelicized. The famous saying is more Irish become more Irish than the Irish themselves.
Michéal
Um,
Doyle.
yeah, and what happens is these families are uh, using English and Irish law when it benefits them for what situation they're in, but they're primarily using Irish law because 9 times out of 10 during the 300 days of the year, the king's not bothered about what is happening in Ireland as long as it's quiet and the stuff's coming across. And he's got his troops for his levy for the 30 days a year. And what is happening on the ground local level is not of an import to him before we start getting into the laws that you mentioned there. Um, and the Fitzgeralds are, like I say, intermarrying. They're speaking Irish. The Burkes are speaking Irish. They're using this law. But the Kildare Fitzgeralds and the Butlers are a little bit more England leaning, and they're rivals of these other groups as well. So they're feeding into, oh, look what they're doing. They're turning their back on English ideals. And then you have in the 14th century, you have because the earlier colonies of Norman invaders, although the nobility kind of secured their lands, the wee colonies that came across of Welsh, primarily Welsh and some English settlers, those colonies tended to fail, and a lot of people went back. But in the 14th century, you have a new wave coming in, a new group of people, and they are the new settlers, new English, basically. And they're looking at these English lords, Fitzgeralds and Burkes, and going, "These aren't English. What is this you're speaking?" And they actually refer to them as Irish dogs. And it's written in the in
As
sort of
Irish dogs, did you say?
as Irish dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the Statutes of Kilkenny here, and you are right. They did come out in 1366, and but the thing about the family names, it says here that they forbade the intermarriage between the native Irish and native English, and it also forbade the English fostering Irish children and the
Mm-hmm.
English adoption of Irish children and the use of Irish names and dress. So that might be what you were talking about a moment ago. I'm pretty sure that there's a different law that was directed at the Irish people that they had to change their names.
Yeah. So the Statutes of Kilkenny, I believe, there's another one in 1457.
That's probably it. Yeah.
Which is a rewrite of the Statutes of Kilkenny because the original Statutes of Kilkenny, I believe, failed
Yep.
although it existed and it was largely ignored. So, and I believe in I'm going to say 1457, another law it was rewritten. It was rewritten and reinterpreted and that's where
Hmm.
the specific, I believe, the names came in. But that is
It says here, while the statutes were sweeping in scope and aim, the English never had the resources to fully
yeah,
implement them. And
no.
it was around the time when I believe the 1300s, it could be the 13th century, um, that Ireland went through what was called the Gaelic revival, and we could probably do it something like that nowadays. But uh, so that's the period where the Irish or the Anglo-Norman chieftains, lords, became, as you said already, Níos Gallinan and Gaelfein, which is more Irish than the Irish themselves, and they actually took over sponsoring the harp player. They had a court Brehon and things like that. So it was a very interesting period in Irish history.
Yeah, it just shows because a really big arc of mine is 800 years. We're saying 800 years. It's probably the one term I hate more than anything. It's more like 312 years. The Tudor colonization of Ireland, and I mean literal colonization as we interpret it today, literally happened in the Tudor conquest. Before that, it was primarily migratory groups moving in and assimilating. And the argument of what is it, and that goes back into the nationalities and nationhood and this idea in the annals of like foreigners and but like even in the annals they refer, and it's not the annals, in another text, the Burkes are referred to as our foreigners, because they're still seen as maybe outside of the as outside the Gael, but they're still um seen as ours because they may have been not of Gaelic descent, but they're promoting Irish. They're defending Gaelic lands against English imposition. They are doing everything an Irish lord is doing in terms of protecting um, the Gaelic space, as it were, so the Irish world, from, and it doesn't matter where they're from because they're still putting their work in to defend Ireland. And that's this terminology. But then even then, and that's not to form some sort of like idea of like how they view the world, because on another level, obviously there's earlier texts where they hate each other because they're claiming this Milesian, oh, I'm just of Milesian descent, and I'm just of, I'm not from the same group as you, and
Yeah.
so it shows the fluidity of self-identity, and how they viewed the world and how the world viewed them, or how external forces like the English viewed the Irish and how they viewed the English and themselves and the wee subgroups that exist. What I think is prevalent, though, is that in is the point of them referring to there's distinctions between later migratory groups and early migratory groups. But then on another sub level is it doesn't actually matter who you are or where you're from. If you're willing if you're speaking Irish, if you're defending Irish held space, then you are welcome because you're not a colonial force, which is obviously what we see during the Tudor period when we start seeing the plantations. You really start to see the divide, in and a lot of that's man-made again with their um, massacres in Portadown and all these sort of things, and these are weaponized and politicized and really kind of there to cause that divide on purpose.
Yeah. I see that you also had a conversation with Rua Butler. That's the guy who I interviewed recently, and I believe you talked about something a bit different than what we talked about because we just talked about his books. But the first Butler, Theobald
Mhm.
Walter, could you tell us a little bit about that conversation and did you learn anything interesting?
Theobald, oh yeah, I did a full video on the butlers. I did make a sort of sweeping statement that I listened to back and I'm like, oh, in the sense of that I say every butler is descended through Theobald, and obviously as we've talked about, one of the latest statutes does say that Irishmen must change the name to a job title, and one of those job titles is butler.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a
Okay.
sweeping statement, but in most likely actually maternal and paternal lines, we actually all descend from medieval characters anyway, so it's probably not that sweeping. Anyway, yeah, Theobald comes across in 1172 with Henry II, and because of multiple migrations into Ireland, obviously around the Norman period, 1168, the first troops sort of land, but 1169 is the most famous landing of Strongbow, and then you have 1172 when the Henry II starts showing an interest in Ireland, and he brings across with him more families to dot around and grant land. And Theobald is one of these individuals that is given land because he's friends with the king. I think they grew up together, if I remember rightly, so that they've got a very good relationship. And it just shows. Now, there's a really good point, a really interesting thing about this that often gets brought up again in other social circles, in that it states that every Irish lord bent the knee. And what I think this is a very clear misinterpretation of Irish politics, in that bending the knee bending the knee and then backstabbing the individual afterwards when the time was right, was very prevalent in Irish politics. Brian had to go up north 3 times to subjugate the O'Neill, because he would subjugate them. They'd bend the knee. They'd be like, yeah, sure, mate. Yeah, we'll listen to you now. And then as soon as Brian's walked out the door, they're already on the phone to their
Yeah.
O'Cahans, and
As
like,
soon as he
right,
went over the hill.
yeah. Just honestly, guys, we need to get this stuff together next reading period, because that last one was terrible.
Yeah.
So, and people use this sort of Henry II trope of like he conquered Ireland but had the bent the knee, so therefore he owned it. But it actually shows, what it really shows is that how Irish people viewed kingship and viewed um, politics, and the way that English did. The feudal model didn't fit in Ireland. It was a square going into a circle hole, and because it was never formed in Ireland, it was a foreign import, and it made in with France and sort of refined in England, and I always say that we were more closely related. The political system we would have more in line with in Europe would be the Holy Roman Empire.
It's
Would be
interesting. Yeah.
would probably be our closest cousin, as it were, as a political system.
Yeah.
So whenever people try to interpret the conquest of Ireland from an English standpoint, you can't apply the English mindset to Ireland and just say, because although
I
that's what
have a
they were doing.
friend who calls it Anglo brain.
Yeah, well, I mean, I get it, because at the time the English were thinking with Anglo brain, but we've conquered there. They've all bent the knee,
Yeah. Yeah.
like back home for scones and tea. And but at the time, the Irish are just the way that they view politics. It's just like, yeah, we'll tell you whatever you want to hear for now,
Yeah.
and but give me time to sort of do what I need to do,
Yeah.
and then because me bending the knee doesn't hurt my feelings. I don't feel this
No.
amazing God and justified. Like, oh, that's it. You're now my Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just say the words. you
Yeah.
know. Uh,
And you're kind of bringing up another topic here, which was a feature of the Irish system, which is the custom of Tannistry.
mm,
And that was one of the reasons, my interpretation of history, how I read it, is that that's why it took so long for the British Tudor forces, however you want to phrase it. There were so many different waves of attempts, let's say, to subjugate Irish people. But the way I look at it is the reason why they were more easy to bend the knee is because they didn't have the primogeniture here, which is the system that the firstborn son inherits the title of the father if when the father dies. And so the British crown at the time, they would make an agreement with me, but if they killed me, it wouldn't necessarily go to my son. It would go to the Tanist who was named during my lifetime. And that was a problem for the English, and that led to a case, the case of Tannistry, which was the longest case in probably ever in history, um, where you had these two rival factions, and I wish I knew the names of these two
the
factions.
O'Rourke's and the O'Reillys.
No.
Oh,
They're
right. I
they're
thought you were going on about the Cavan case, which is one of the
no,
longest disputes.
no. I mean, yeah, that gave us the that was resolved by making it was really like you go over there and you go over there, and that gave us the Kingdom of East and West Breffni. Now, this was a family from Munster, I think, around the Cork region, and it was around the early 17th century, so early 1600s. The flight of the Earls had already taken place,
Mm.
um, and the so we had one family claiming that they had a right to the land because of inheritance, because the eldest daughter, her father had died, right? And so we had one family claiming the right to the land through the eldest daughter, which that's the thing, English law didn't recognize women rights really for a long time, but that didn't bother this man. He was happy to use his wife's status as leverage, to get the land. But then on the other side, you had another family, a chieftain, who was claiming it through the custom of Tannistry.
Yeah, that
And
actually happened a lot more than just one family.
yeah,
It happened to the O'Neills actually just before the Tudor conquest as well. Um, two branches of the O'Neills. The English were trying to, I believe it's Hugh O'Neill's family, were trying to
yeah,
push Hugh O'Neill into power, but they had a cousin who was had a stronger claim to
it
the
was
through the
was
Tannistry.
a Shane O'Neill.
Yeah, it might have been Shane or
Yeah, I think, and
yeah.
that and his name, and it's just funny how these things come back around. Like, I think he is the progenitor of the McShane family.
Yes,
Because
yes,
I know someone called McShane, Sandra McShane, and if she's listening, hello. Um, and that's her branch of the family. And I do remember reading about that, and I was fascinated by it because isn't Hugh O'Neill the guy who was raised in England, educated in England, and then he came back
I
to.
think no, it was an English family in Dublin, I believe, is the
Oh,
so he
okay,
was fostered out to an English family. I can't remember the name of them in Dublin, I believe. So, but he
right.
was so. But bearing in mind Dublin at the time,
It was
It's an
basically
Anglo city.
exactly.
He's
I,
raised
I
as
I
an
often say,
Englishman.
like, Dublin has never been Irish in all its history. It used to be Viking, and then it was British or Anglo. So
But the
this is
point
what I
stands.
heard anyway, that he was educated by English standards and in the English schools. And then he went, he went back up to the north, right? And the English are thinking like, oh yes, we have him. Like, this is great. And then he ended up flipping on the English, making bullets out of like a church roof or something like that. The lead tiles on the church
I
roof.
haven't done the cover, but yeah, I know obviously
Uh,
the first bit. Yeah, that's. I
yeah,
mean, yeah. The thing is, he also because people's interpretation of 16th century warfare during the Tudor period in Ireland is that Hugh O'Neill's running around with these gallow glass and these cairns and these spear. Actually, Hugh O'Neill really remodeled the army to modern
yeah,
standards of the
yeah.
time.
That's
It was
right.
a
Yeah.
very highly disciplined professional army. And I suppose he could, some of that can be thanked for the English for rearing him because he's a noble, he's a gentleman, he's raised in a noble family, or a gentlemanly family. So he's given a military education, he's given a formal education for as deserving of his title. Also, with the English interpretation that they're going to be sending him to rule a very unruly area in their name, so he needs to have all these sort of educational merits behind him to sort of help him along the way to further English interests. But like you say, he gets up there. He was also a master of propaganda in for the Irish in the sense of he starts promoting crannogs, he starts wearing Irish dress, really trying to like emphasize his Irishness, and to sort of shed off this English um, cloak that he's maybe being associated
Yeah.
with to the Irishman, but then to dealing with he's got English advisors as well in his team, and he's writing to England, and he's got these correspondence. He's still retaining some of that Anglo, influence in the way he's dealing with them, and he's not playing both sides, but he is speaking to both sides how they both want to be spoken to, so that he can further his interests. He's a really smart man. In fact, He's a very smart man. In fact, the only reason he lost the war to the Spanish, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think, the Spanish help that he requested for and begged for help, and
They landed in Cork instead.
yeah,
This comes back actually to what I was saying earlier about he leveraged his Catholic identity to get the Spanish to come over and help him. They were supposed to land in Ulster and they were all going to march down together to Kinsale, but they landed in Cork. And then I don't know how, because they didn't have phones back then, so I don't know how the news got from Cork up to Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland, where he lived. And then it was like a panic to march down to to Kinsale. And by the time the men got there, they were exhausted, and it was a crushing defeat. And like, it's
but
really,
actually, that's not even the bit that defeated them because he still would have won Kinsale if he'd held out. The English army was ravaged with malnutrition, malaria,
yeah,
um, and if he had held out, I believe they recommend for 3 days, which he could have done, and he wanted to do. He wanted to hold out, but Aguela, I think, is the Spanish. He said, "No, no, we need to counterattack. We need to." And he says, "You go up on that hill, and we'll push out from this way." And O'Neill's like, "No, no, but if I go up on that hill, I'm exposed." And he says, "You're only exposed if we don't push out of here." And he's like, "Okay." So he goes up on the bloody hill, and then Aguela doesn't push out, so he's exposed.
wow.
So it's
So
yeah,
it really was the Spanish
yeah, really was the Spanish,
that
really,
screwed them over. Yeah,
yeah,
'cause
because
I
they
thought it
could have.
was just that they landed in the wrong place, but
That was the initial, but Hugh O'Neill managed to turn that
yeah,
uh, into a, like say the English army was suffering at the time from they weren't equipped. They were really poorly equipped. If anyone goes up to the museum in Dungannon, they I don't know if they still do. I think they do. They have a soldier from that time period. A lot of them are the English are in outdated armor. They're not equipped for fighting in Ireland. They're more designed for continental warfare. They're really poorly set up for this campaign. And England is they've got something like 18,000 troops, which is uh, a massive amount for that time period. It's the most troops until it's the most troops that have ever been in Ireland at this any one stage. But they're so underfunded, they're so disheveled, and they nearly lost it. But because the Spanish had said this battle plan, it stopped down. So I always say that Ireland was 3 days away from being, you know, united
I
as a
know,
single entity.
I know.
Yeah. But those 3 days, but there's history is, I don't know if anyone games, but there's a very famous term called cod timing, which is
Call
whenever
of
an
Duty
individual,
timing.
yeah, whenever you're looking at someone to come through the door, and the minute you turn away, they come in, you know, and it's a very famous term in the gaming community. But I think Ireland has had this through its entire history that it just seems to be the minute something's on the whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a United Ireland. It can be anything that's sort of, but it's just the minute an Irishman's just about to get there, something happens, which I always confuses me about the luck of the Irish because I'm like, what luck?
Well, there's a famous John Lennon song, and it says, "If you had the look of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead. If you had the look of the Irish, you'd wish you were English instead."
Oh, jeez.
I know. I can't. I used to play it on the guitar, but I never sang that line when I was playing it. Yeah. Right. Let's go back a little bit more now into the Viking era, because I see you also have a video, the Sons of Ivar the Boneless,
Mhm.
and you have a video of Viking surnames in Ireland. So could you maybe unpack that first? Like, tell us about the Sons of Ivar the Boneless, and from there talk about the Viking names that we have in Ireland today.
Yeah, so the Emer, anyone who's watched the Viking TV series or any other sort of film about that period, especially, well, they don't really cover Ireland, which is very frustrating
Well,
because Dublin
they
was very
they don't seem to cover Ireland at all. Even though it
Yeah,
was filmed here, because I know because
yeah,
my brother was an extra in it. He was actually a fighter because he does Viking reenactments. That's how
yes,
there's a link there between my brother and Philip O'Hade, Irish medieval history, and Nathan Featherstone, who does the stick fighting. They both know my brother because he's a Viking reenactor, and so when they're filming Vikings in Dublin or somewhere in Ireland, let's just say, they were looking for extras who could fight, who could wield the sword, and obviously my brother's group got in there, and but the storyline didn't come to Ireland. But Ivor the Boneless, he had a legacy in Ireland.
yeah, which is crazy. I mean, the legacy is we only know him as Ivar the Boneless or this, son of Ragnar. Is this individual Ivar, or Ivar, because of the annals. And there are other sources outside of Ireland that say this Ivar actually died somewhere else, and they're not the same person. But from the Irish perspective, looking at the Norse world, this is the same individual, and this is the individual that they are talking about. Whenever he would find his own legacy of the Emer, who are the sons of Ivar the Boneless, possible son, depending on the historicity of it all, of Ragnar the Boneless. Um, and they are from a place in Norway, a village in Norway, which is actually more Danish than Norwegian. But it is within the Norway sphere of influence and within whatever the boundaries of a Norwegian kingdom.
Wow.
But they are more influenced by the Danish. Uh, so they're Danish leaning, but Norwegian. Anyway, they're from that sort of part of the world. They come across with the Viking invasions, creating Jorvik, Dublin, and multiple other settlements. Dublin being Dublin and York were probably the two most important settlements in the Viking world of these isles. And to exclude either one, I think, is almost sacrilege when it comes to talking about this topic at any point. We had one of the largest slave markets. Um,
In
I don't
Dublin,
want to say in the world, but definitely within Europe.
in Dublin, right?
And yeah, Dublin. Uh, and so Ivar and his descendants would own Jorvik, or the York and Dublin, and parts of Scotland, the Isles of Scotland, and parts of Wales, and these wee fragmentary sort of areas in. And they wouldn't be the only family. There's other families that would come across, again, intermarriages, alliances, warfare, would sort of say. And the Irish had a very good relationship with Ivar. The Ulstermen, he kind of had a bit of a problem with them because he needed a good. The thing is, they needed to have a good relationship with the Irish because whenever their interests were threatened in Scotland or England, they needed to leave these small settlements exposed effectively,
Yeah.
easily were overrun, easily taken by the Irish. So they needed these. Problem is with the Ulstermen, they were like the Neil they were doing that. They were going, we're mates. I'm going to go to England because York's being attacked. And the Ulstermen were like, yeah, yeah, we're mates. And as soon as the ships were out of view,
Yeah, yeah.
they just burnt these settlements to the ground.
Those damn Ulster men, huh?
Yes. And yeah, yeah, we've been a problem to everyone in history. And yeah. So anyway, this continues on for it's another sort of 200 years, 250 years before surnames
Yeah.
start to form in Ireland.
Hmm.
So to say a Viking surname is a bit of a misnomer, um, because these are just Norse people living within Ireland, or Norse descended people, whether maternally for their mother or paternally from the father. These are Gaul Gaels, these are Hiberno Norse, these
Yeah.
are whatever term you want to use. They are well established within the Irish world and the Viking world, wider Viking world. Um, but they are primarily they're speaking Irish and whatever Norse, Scandinavian language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are wearing Irish brooches. They are doing everything Irish and they're doing everything Norse, and it just really blurs the lines between the two. Um, but they sort of, as surnames start to form in Ireland, they will obviously start to incorporate them in their own um, vocabulary. I suppose is a really not really the term, but into their own. It's part of it starts something that they start to do as well. It's a
Their
it's
own
a phenomenon.
identity.
Yes, would be the better term. They start forming it into their own identity as well, and this sort of it's funny because they start obviously this is a slow transition over a couple of hundred years. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, there are families that wouldn't even have surnames till the 16th century.
Yeah.
And that's just not just Norse families, that's Irish families too.
Yeah.
And the Normans then come across. Obviously, it's the end of the Viking era in 1066, as I say, on these isles. It's not a definitive date. It didn't just happen on 1066 on the day of boom. you know, but and then but it's funny when the Normans start coming across to Ireland, and they take over Dublin and Wexford, and they're saying to these Norse descended people, which shows that even at this time, 169 years, 109 years after 3 years after the Battle of Hastings, and after the Viking Age has ended, that there's still this contingent of individuals that aren't quite in the Gaels' self-identity, and they exist as this separate entity. But the Normans come across and like, we're descended from the same people. We're all buddies. We're all, you're Norsemen. The Normans were Norsemen. We are cousins. And the Dublin elite and the Wexford elite of these Northmen are going, yeah, yeah, yeah. So come on in. And then the Normans kick them out. Once they're settled in, they kick them out. They're like, nothing to do. Which is why across the river in Dublin, originally in Old Dublin, there's a Normanton. Or Normanton or something. It's I can't remember the modern
Yeah.
day, but it's basically these Norse people that were pushed out across the river, and then there's other locations on the hills around Dublin of these Norse families kicked out. And it again, so it just shows how our history just really isn't straightforward. But yeah, you'd then have a lot of families obviously adopting these surnames. So you have and like the Doyles are supposedly like we spoke about earlier. I can't even think of all the names that sort of exist. The video goes through them all,
I
but
think McLaughlin is
yeah, McLaughlin's a
another
weird one.
name.
Irish, Scottish, and Norse sort of links to
Yeah.
it. Obviously, Loughlin is the name of the land of lakes. It was a term we said
Yes.
that the Irish analysts said that's where the Vikings come from, the land of
Exactly.
lakes.
Yeah.
But we
And
don't know if it
it's
meant Scotland
even
or Norway.
excuse me, Loughlin's town
Uh,
as well. That's a town of the people who come from the land of lakes.
It's a bit
Yeah.
of a lot mouthful for a wee time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But this is the thing. I'm actually I'm working on a book on place names of Ireland, and
Anyway,
that that that
yes.
gave me a reason to investigate the place names of Ireland that are named after Vikings. So you have things like Carlingford,
Mm,
Longford. Some people think that Dublin was named by the Vikings, but Dufflin is the Irish Gaelic for Blackpool. But the Vikings called
mm,
it Dyflin, like Dyflinn. So it just gave me an insight into how much the cultures actually mixed and matched. And isn't it interesting that once the Anglo-Normans and the later British administration, when they started to anglicize the place names, they did it in a couple of different ways. And what they opted to do in most places is to just give a transliteration. So that's why we have place names like Ballybooley, but it doesn't mean anything in English. It only means something if you translated it, it'd be like the town of the milk pasture, the town of the milking place, you know. So I just find that very interesting, especially that the idea that the Vikings named all of the islands on the coast, well, most of the islands on the coast, and that even goes for what we today call Ireland's eye, but it's like eye, as in the eye that you can see, like the Sul. But it wasn't called that by the Irish. That was originally called Inish Iru, which is which in English would be Ireland's island, right?
Hmm.
Like the island of Iru. And Iru was the name of the country. But when the Vikings came in, they heard that and they were like, well, we call our islands I. So that's why you have
Hmm.
Lambay Island. That's why you have other islands that end with the AY, which comes from the Norse. I don't know what the name of that letter is, but the circle with the dash going through it and Y.
Hmm.
And so they called it like, oh, it's Ireland's island. So we're going to call it Ireland's I, which meant the same thing in their language. But then when when the British came over, they just heard that and they're like, oh, it must be the Sul, it must be the eye of Ireland. Uh, and so that's the way these names have come into existence over the years, like multiple borrowings and rechanging the names and transliterations and so on. And that's why we have places today that just don't make any sense unless you look at the Irish version of the name, or if you have a little bit of the history of the place, it makes more sense then. So I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because the English didn't want us to have a connection to our culture, our ancestral culture. But if you translated some of the place names in Ireland, you would feel like you're in Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or something like that, because it's like the Valley of the Pest. You know, it's like Nuada's Plain. And who was Nuada? He was the king of the two-headed Danann. Hello? Like, that would be so much cooler than Maynooth, right? So, yeah, that's my rant over.
It's the same with this. The exact same thing happened with surnames. I mean, you can see a lot of surnames and how they've. I mean, with most surnames, they're in their native Irish form. When you look at the translations that exist today from it, there's up to 20 variations of the name.
Yeah.
Because the standardization of English didn't happen until the 19th century. So by then you'd had 300 years almost of, or 200 years of these branches just breaking off in different variations. Obviously, the further back you go, the less variations. I think Irish didn't sort of deviate into Ulster, Munster, and Connacht dialects until the 14th century. So these sort of variations would be less and less as you sort of go back.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that like you say, the same thing that happens with townlands, and obviously a lot of townlands contain the surnames in, because Ballia or Bally is obviously the variation. It's like townland or house
Yeah.
of, you know.
And
Uh,
it's also found in Awalia, which is like your home, right? It's like
hmm,
a Ballia, right? Awalia. Um, and you just mentioned it there, the provinces, the stir suffix on that on the provinces is also from the Vikings, because like we used to call it our Irish names, like for Munster was Mumu, for Leinster was Lagin, for
hmm,
Ulster was Ullad, and for Connacht was Connachta.
hmm,
And Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht is the exception, but all of the provinces that end with stir is left over from the Vikings, and
hmm,
and all the places that have Ford in it as well. And you were mentioning about the family names, and I think one of the ones that popped into my head as you were talking there was O'Sullivan,
hmm,
which means Osul Awan. Like, and if you look into the progenitor of that clan, it was somebody who had one eye. Sul
hmm.
Awan, it means like one-eyed. So I just find it really interesting. And I've done a bit of research into my own name. You said it's not that hard, difficult with me, but I think it is difficult a little bit because there's multiple Flanagan clans and they're not all
Yeah,
genetically related to each other,
that's
right?
correct. Every
Yeah,
family has that though. That everyone has that problem.
yeah,
In the sense of because there wasn't one individual called Flan, or Flanagan. Yeah, I can't pronounce
yeah,
the Gaelic, but you
yeah.
know,
So
um,
just on the surnames, right? Do you know where the word hooligan comes from?
I have. Is it a variation of like houlihan or
Hooligan, yes, and in Irish it's O'Houlihan,
mm,
right? So there's evidence that the earlier form of Flanagan would be pronounced Flanagan, right?
mhm,
Because there was a time when that guttural the G, what became the G, was originally a trophy h sound.
yeah.
And so when I looked up my name in like a standard, name book, I have a book of surnames over there, Irish surnames. It says things like Flan means red or ruddy,
Mhm.
and I'm like, But then I've read other things as well where Fla, the prefix of the name, means noble, and Na means of the, and Kain means law, or what we use today as tax. So
Mm.
would I be right in assuming that Flanagan means something like nobles of the law, in the same way that Flannery means nobles of the king?
I was gonna say because the sole Flanagans of the a variation of Flannery is the Dalkosh family who were Brehons.
Yes. And here's the
Yes.
thing as well, right? You're asking me to speak about the Brehon families. That Egan family, right?
Mm.
Wherever you see that name Egan, like Agan, right? It implies that you were Brehons. So Egans and Mac Egans and Mac Aegon, they were hereditary Brehons to the O'Connors and the Butlers and the O'Kennedys of Ormond, and they operated a prominent law school at Redwood Castle. Now, I have
Can
a
I just say
friend.
that it's also a variation of Hagan, who were the Brehons of
Exactly,
Tyrone.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, exactly. So I have a friend, Fionn Coughlin, and if he's watching, hello, Fionn, um, who told me about this. He's like, no, your family were definitely Brehons because you have that suffix in your name, like Flanagan, Hagan, Agan. So I don't know what that means, but it probably goes back to what I was saying a minute ago, that the g sound would have once been a k sound, right? So and kine is, so you have this thing called kine Odhavon, which is the law of Odhavon. But today
Hmm.
we use that word kine for tax, right? It's like kind is what we use for tax, but back then it was probably just a promulgation, a statute, or so to speak, something like that. So I'm wondering, like, and you're the expert here, so you can tell me if I'm way off or not. But do you think I'm on the right track with that?
It's interesting because we have multiple problems when it comes to surnames associated with job titles. And I will use the Brehon, since we're on the Brehon Academy, the Brehon example, in that in some cases we don't know what the Brehon was, in the sense of a Brehon can be loosely has been used to describe anyone of a learned position who wasn't a specific in a judiciary judge sort of format, but could have been an olive, historian, a genealogist. Um,
Hmm.
these these, especially with the English sort of translations coming down later on, there is an overlap. It's not. I'm not saying it's a massive, but there is an overlap where we individuals, and also because a lot of, especially during the church, a lot of these individuals would have had a lot of ties to the church, especially if they were learned or academic, because the churches were used for a lot of the schools, and so you would kind of have this overlap there as well. That sort of kind of confuses the whole situation. So what I'm saying, the point I'm raising is that so that because you have said the way that you've said about Flanagan, and I've said that there is an overlap which kind of muddies the water a tiny bit. It's like the Fermanagh branch of Flanagan's were earners, which were land holding families within the church.
What did you say? Earners?
Earners.
What's that?
An earner is an ecclesiastical is a family who work within the church. They have a
Okay.
say within the church. They own land within the church.
Oh, I got
They
you. Right.
don't. They are involved in the running of the church, but they don't take holy orders. But they are
Mm.
still sponsored. They still have the haircut. They still they sit on the monastic sites, sort
Yeah.
of and they are educated. Obviously, they are an important family within church, but they're not. Although in the early church, they did provide the priests for the church as well. So a lot of families, but primarily their role is within the land, Terman lands, which are sanctuary held
Okay.
lands within the church. They were in charge of them.
Interesting.
Um, so the Fermanagh Flanagans are an earner family, which obviously, if they're in the church, if they're associated with the church, they're learned. If they're learned, they could be, that could be another term for the
Brehon.
Brehon.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it shows that actually, because I know that we've just briefly touched on the Flanahys, who are variation, can be used as variations of the name from the Seoul Flanagan, which is like I said earlier, but there is an example of a possible existence of the point you're trying to raise within the Fermanagh branch of Flanagan's. So yeah, it's possible that what you're saying does have some merit. The problem you're going to have is that a lot of our translations of our surname and understandings of our surname um, really come from the 19th century. And we had this new Gaelic revival, obviously, in the 19th and 20th century, and everyone started to re-Gaelicize their name. And you had all these interpretations and misinterpretations and understandings and misunderstandings that a lot of these names may not descend from where we think they descend from. There is a lot of gray area in the research of surnames because of how our surnames went from Irish to Gaelic to English. No, Irish to to English, but not in a clean cut. It was like a transition
Yeah.
of 300 years that really broke it up and almost destroyed it. So yeah, but I haven't ever thought about that before. So, but I will say that it's interesting that in the very point you've raised there, I can already think of an example with the Flanagans that sort of ties in. So it could be something worth digging into. I think you're on the right track for something to look into, especially. But I would say again, the pitfall will be that not every, although Egon or Agon or that sound can relate to a specific um, job role or as being a Brehon, um, I will say that the modern translation of a name, like the modern variation of a name where you read it and you go, oh, it's got that actually in the previous surname may not have. So like Sullivan's a good example. You mentioned them, where you have Sullivan and everyone thinks of the O'Sullivans in Munster, but there was a very small branch, an unrelated family in Munster, in Ulster, right on the around Tyrone, Cavan sort of area. And they've all but kind of disappeared, really. They don't really appear in the annals since, but it's another variation. It doesn't come from the same
Yes.
eponym,
Mm-hmm.
although they're probably both called O'Sullivans now today. So you've just got to be really careful when you go down that route. Like same with McCarthy, the Carthys. That comes from four names. McCarthy's surname comes from actual four Irish names. So you've just got to be careful which one you're associating it with when you're lining up the lines because they might not be what you think they are.
Yeah.
So, but it would be a very interesting thing to sort of try to map.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I've learned so much about my country from researching the place names of Ireland. And anybody who's listening, like I would really recommend to research the place names of Ireland because the land starts to open up to you and tell you its stories. And there's a lot of stories in this island. And I've been learning Irish on Duolingo and some podcasts and videos and so on, but I'm far from being fluent in it. And this is a useful way that you can actually brush up on your Irish, because often, maybe not so much anymore because Irish language is making a revival, but I remember when I was in school and we'd be talking about Irish and the attitude was kind of like, what would I want to learn Irish for? It's a useless language. Well, it's not useless when you have a reason to understand what the words mean, and there's no better excuse than to look at the place names of Ireland. I want to come back to something you said a while ago about the Irish system was a little bit more like the Holy Roman Empire. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, so the Holy Roman Empire, in a very basic sense, the we have to simplify it. Is it's a group of duchies that sort of get together to recognize a king, and it was all based on the ability of that king to wield that power. So if enough duchies went against him, then he wasn't the king no more, and then their person was, and it was just it was basically whichever king. There's a very good Philip actually says a good sentence in a lot of his videos, and that it's basically the individual with the biggest stick is the High King or the Emperor. And whoever has the biggest stick wins, and that is the Holy Roman Empire in a sense.
Yeah.
They all have this identity that they are part of the empire. They are
Mm.
part of the Holy Roman Empire,
Yeah.
but they have their own unique place within it too.
Hmm.
And they, and these are, and whoever they decide, obviously, then they all get together in these wee groups, factions, and they put their individual in place who's probably going to promote their needs. Like politicians today, we all vote. None of us like any of the politicians we vote for. If you like a politician, any politician in the world, if you like that person and you think that guy's great, I'm sorry, you need your head looking at. You vote for that person because you believe he represents most of your interests, or he's going to push forward some of the interests that you have against the other individual who's has less of the interests you have.
Yeah.
And that is basically it. If you elevate this individual beyond that, then that's cult worshipping. I've not no time for that.
No, I
So
agree. And I think that's a really good point, what you said there, that the individual has the biggest stick. Because when I talk about the kingship, the nature of kingship in early Ireland, I will always point out that the kings were elected. But that's not, I don't want to create a false idea that everybody had a vote. And so the reason why I asked you, how would you compare this to the Holy Roman Empire, is I use the example of when the new pope is being elected
mm,
by the College of Cardinals. So I try to make an analogy between the only people who can vote in that election are the College of Cardinals, but any of the cardinals is eligible to become pope. Now, so what I would imagine would have happened back then is you had the Rig Dona, the people who were eligible to be king, and they would get into a tent or have a meeting that only they were sitting at, and among themselves they would have a discussion, and then they would select their king, their chieftain, and then in the lifetime of the chieftain he would select the Tannish, the second in command. And so uh, I thought that's what you were going to say when I asked you, could you
I
elaborate
mean,
on what
I
you meant?
will, because that is the perfect situation, but that rarely happened.
Mm,
That is the
yeah.
ideal. That is the thing they want to put in practice, as
Yeah.
in this is the law and this is how we do it. but that actually rarely happened. The
Yeah.
McCarthys are a great example of a father and son inheritance going back centuries.
Yeah.
Um, or well, there is a brief period where we don't know if it was a nephew, but I mean, it's literally two or three individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the Oanoctor succession, where they had specific clan groups that could elect their king within the Oanoctor, and they had the inner circle, who were the ones that from which the kingship was decided from. I believe it was the Oanoctor Athlin, the Oanoctor Anya, and the Oanoctor Cashel, and maybe the Oanoctor Lochline, but I'm not too sure. But anyway, these groups would get together to pick who's going to be the king of the Oanoctor. But then you had the Oanoctor other groups who were the outer circle. Now, they are more than likely families that claim to be of Oanoctor descent, but it's a fabricated line. Everyone knows it. No one's admitting to it because they want to keep the alliances. So, but they're not involved in the kingship. So, now that's the principles that's the idea that they have. But by the 7th century, the Oanoctor Lochline, I believe, turned around and go, nah, we want to keep it. And they wipe the chessboard and they start doing a. And then the Oanoctor Cashel went, well, we've got a bigger stick, so we're taking it. And it's from that point on the Oanoctor Cashel, eventually the McCarthys rule the Oanoctor and Desmond and all of
Yeah.
and we can see it. We can see that, like I said to you before, I think it was before the chat, and I had an idea of how you envisaged Ireland in the
Yeah.
sense of like,
I knew what you're going to say.
yeah, a full circle. Nice to come back to a
Yeah.
full circle. Is that that is how. So when a lawyer interprets the law, but then there are individuals who aren't following the law,
Yeah.
and this is the same thing. In
Yeah.
practice, Tannistry existed, and that is how things were done, but it wasn't always done like that. In
Yeah.
fact, it was actually more often not done like that, which is why the laws existed, because you've got these people going, this is how it's meant to be done. If we don't want to keep knocking 7 bells out of each other between cousins, because if we do it like this, it will work. But then for it to work,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
it means someone else has to give up the power or whatever, and then no one else.
the Brehon laws are great and they're very noble and but I would describe them fundamentally as aspirational.
Hmm.
These are the guidelines for how we would like society to work in an ideal situation. But you're right to point out that human nature is human nature, because there was 5 types of land ownership, and private property was not really common under the Brehon laws, except for the nobles, because they had the power to hold on to it for many, many generations. And I remember a long time ago, I think it was in one of my earlier presentations, it said something like, as all docks attract ships, so power attracts nobility, or something like that. Can you hear that dog barking in the background?
So it's
Yeah.
only a little bit, very quiet.
Yeah, something like um, as all docks attract ships, so does power attract the nobility, or something like that. And it's basically like there was an aspirational idea in the law, but and that's interesting as well, because in another book that I read, Lawrence Ginnell, The Brehon Laws, a Legal Handbook. Now he writes about the Brehon Laws, but he does it in kind of a romantic way.
Hmm.
Um, so he has lovely quotes in it like, the laws of a land are an irrebuttable witness to the people's character. Now he's also he's also kind of looking at them with rose-colored glasses,
Hmm.
so he's not
Yeah.
making this observation that this isn't how it always worked. This might have been what they said in the law, but it didn't always work that way in practice. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. And what I like to do is present the laws as they were, as they
Hmm.
are. And within that, we can have a conversation about how did they actually work, and how did society look under those Brehon laws. And I'm just looking at the time, and I think we only have about 5 minutes left. And do you want to plug anything? Do you have any? I'm going to put YouTube channel into the description box here. But how can people contact you? How can they find out more about the clans of early Ireland?
I would say YouTube in the long format videos is kind of like slowed down for now. I'm in more into the short form, just because of how easy it is to get stuff out. There are I'm on TikTok as well, and I do lives normally 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if you want to come about 10 o'clock Ireland time till midnight, is the normal time frame. If you want to come across on the live and sort of chat. I will say to anyone watching, come across on the YouTube side because the TikTok side is mental, and I wouldn't see the comment. But yeah, I mean, come or just comment on a video, just say something, and I will happily put it on my list. I've got a long list of surnames to do, but I'll say, you've got to give me time, guys. They take a lot of research because what I want to make sure is I get out the factual stuff. And there's a lot of misinformation out there which I have to sort of sift through, and figure out how to present in a way that sort of is understandable to a lot of the people who have just a passing interest in it. And that is who I am. And I want to be that middle ground between the academic and the really simplistic Google search that appears whenever I want to be that bridge. But just comment away and I'll happily reply.
Excellent, Mike. I want to thank you for your time and for sharing all of this wonderful knowledge with us. And I'm sure we could talk for a few hours more. And I think I'll join you on one of those live streams if you'll have me, uh,
Oh,
and we can talk a little bit more about the Brehon families.
yeah, I think that's a good idea. Maybe next time we'll go through the families and maybe how they sort of work. Maybe we'll talk to you a bit more about the Brehon side of it on my channel. That'd be really interesting. I think if you agree, like and comment below on Kevin's video here. If that's what you want to see.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
And there you have it, folks. I really enjoyed that conversation with Micheál. I forgot to mention that in the introduction, he prefers to be referred to as Michéal Doyle. So that was a really interesting discussion. I loved how he just was able to rattle off all of these facts and information, and he's a bit of a realist. Like he doesn't indulge in fantasy so much, and I like that about him. I like that he is taking more of an academic approach, but not too academic. So I really enjoyed that conversation. Now, before I go, just please check out Michéal Doyle's channel on YouTube. I think he's on Instagram and X. He's on TikTok for sure. Uh, and he does live streams a couple of days per week. So please check those out as well. I've been talking to Mike for probably over a year now, and it's taken this long to get us on the call together. So yeah, please check out Michéal's channel, and I'm sure you're going. If you like this channel, I'm sure you're going to love that channel as well. He has videos, short form videos, long form videos covering a whole load of topics, but specifically focused on the clans of Ireland and Scotland as well, actually. Now, with all of that being said, just to remind you to check out the brehonacademy.org, where you're going to find all of the information on my online courses. You'll also be able to access the blog. We have a members library over there as well. I forgot to mention that. I think I always forget to mention that. If you become a member of that website, you can have free access. It's free to join. You can have free access to the members library, which has, I think, over 100 resources that are downloadable. And we also have an online store where you can buy merchandise, Brehon Academy merchandise, and that goes a long way to help me. And thanks to those of you who already have bought a t-shirt or whatever. And we also have mugs and posters. Please check us out on social media. So if you're on Facebook, visit us on Facebook, Brehon Academy. If you're on X, we're also on X, but we're not as active over there for now. We're also on TikTok, but not really active there either. Micheál, at the end of his conversation, said to me that I need to get onto TikTok just because the reach is so much more significant over there. But we're also on Instagram, I think I said, and YouTube. So again, please, please subscribe to this channel because I'm so close to getting to 30,000 subscribers. If you want to be in the pre-30K club, join the 29,000 other people, 29,999 other people. Please click subscribe on this video. And until next time, my friends, Slán go fóill.